Hello, Dragonfly Swarm. How do we feel about Yoimiya? It's been a long time since her first banner, and admittedly, a lot has changed around her since her release, so yeah. I think it's only fair that today I tell you everything you need to know about this flashy, powerful, and swag character. She's being rated up in the second half of 2.8 just before Sumeru's release, so my fair assumption is that many players are just gonna skip her no matter what. But for those of you who've had your eye on Yoimiya's rerun, or are just interested in her strengths as opposed to other DPS characters currently, here you go. Today I'm gonna explain the pros and cons that Yoimiya provides as a Pyro Bow DPS, and I'll discuss and debunk some common misconceptions about her, and in doing so, I will help you evaluate the state that Yoimiya is in as of 2.8 Genshin Impact. Also, I want to say thank you so much for the support on my videos recently. I don't know why they've been doing so good, but it's your fault, so I'm gonna thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's start this off by discussing the interesting topics of Yoimiya's longevity and her growing strengths in Genshin. So basically, since her release, players have come to find a very versatile and flexible character in what originally seemed to be a very simplistic and ineffective character. Flashback to that demo we got to play when Inazuma first came out. That was rough. Yoimiya is not and was never considered to be a top tier DPS, but her kit is very abstract, and what I mean by that is almost everything she needs to dish out her very high damage is right there in her elemental skill and burst and her passives. You just press E and you start spamming left click basically. It's a very simple playstyle that Yoimiya on her own can accomplish quite well, therefore the teams you build around her can be filled with any number of supportive teammates to further increase Yoimiya's damage output. And this is just one of the reasons why many of the game's recent characters such as Thoma, Yelan, Ayato, and definitely Yunjin have seen synergies with Yoimiya. And that's all basically to preface this video by saying that Yoimiya is very team building friendly, so as more and more characters are released, inevitably she will see more and more team flexibility. And that doesn't necessarily mean she'll ever have a stronger damage ceiling than someone like Hu Tao, but it does mean that she'll be able to fit onto a lot more viable teams than someone like Hu Tao. So with Yoimiya's longevity unquestionably present, what about her general strengths? Well, the most apparent thing about Yoimiya is her high and fast single target damage output. As a normal attack focused bow user, she not only has the advantage of range, but also a very fast normal attack string, and this allows her to slap out ridiculous amounts of raw damage very easily in a short time. And I say raw damage because there's quite a lot of gear in the game that supports Yoimiya's own damage rather than the damage she can dish with the help of teammates. For example, Hu Tao is significantly less devastating without amp reactions like Melt, Vaporize, and more specifically Xingqiu. This is because she relies on many different things from survivability to amp reactions, etc, etc. It stretches her team versatility very thin to account for all of the things she needs in order to be one of the best units in the game. And Yoimiya doesn't technically have this issue for a number of reasons. While yes, Yoimiya will benefit heavily from characters that can set up amp reactions like Yelan and Xingqiu, she can actually also pair very respectably in teams where amping her own damage isn't the center focus. This is one of the reasons why her team building is so flexible, because she can fit onto niche teams such as overloaded teams and turn them into quite terrifying and competitive team rotations with her high raw damage output and her very strong ability to drive characters like Beto or Fischl. So while Vape teams centered around her own damage are undoubtedly her strongest teams, she's also got a lot of other teams at her disposal thanks to the simple yet powerful value she provides. And while we're on the subject of teams and teammates, I do need to mention Yunjin. Now I'm gonna make a God Duo video for these two because there's a lot to talk about, but essentially C2 Yunjin is competitive with a highly invested Bennett as Yoimiya's best support, which is already absolutely insane to think about since Bennett is one of the strongest supports in the game with a huge reputation. But funny enough, at C6, Yunjin is a completely strictly better support for Yoimiya than even a C6 Bennett with Aquila or Mistsplitter. Absolutely wild. So to simplify that, you can free Bennett up into other teams and run Yoimiya in many of her strongest teams with Yunjin instead. So yeah, Yoimiya's strengths are definitely not few and far between. She's a very capable damage dealer with lots of teams, artifacts, and weapons at her disposal, but she also dishes out some of the highest single target damage in the game whilst doing so by simply pressing E and spamming left click. However, there are some significant weaknesses to account for before you pull for Yoimiya, and while I'd argue none of them have a direct impact on her enjoyability, they do need to be brought up. The first and by far the most restricting of which being that Yoimiya on her own is almost strictly a single target damage dealer. The only AoE damage that she herself can deal is the initial cast of her burst, which has a very low scaling anyways, and as such accounts for a very small portion of her damage. And while her burst Aurus Blaze tags are AoE pyro damage and they do account for a notable amount of her DPS, she herself can't even trigger them. So she's quite literally forced to be able to deal a lot of damage so that she can shred through enemies fast enough to compete with other characters who aren't restricted to single target damage. For example, Xiangling is a 4-star pyro DPS who can unfortunately deal far more damage than Yoimiya in multi-target situations, and even Hu Tao, who is most prominently single target, at least has the benefit of her high scaling AoE burst and her technically AoE charged attacks. Yoimiya doesn't have these luxuries though, and as such she will very likely never have as high of a damage ceiling as top pyro DPS units like Xiangling and Hu Tao do. Another issue, however, is Yoimiya's auto-targeting issues, which is yet another core issue of being a normal attack focused bow user. Although this won't always or even usually be an issue for Yoimiya players, she does have issues sometimes with her arrows not landing on enemies that are either very fast, far away, or both very fast and far away. And honestly, this wouldn't be as big of an issue as it is if it wasn't for the fact that Yoimiya's 3rd and 5th normal attacks have to hit enemies in order for her to be dealing her best damage. Especially in vaporized teams, because if she misses an arrow, she can easily offset her vaporized procs from the 3rd and 5th hits onto the less powerful hits in her attack string, resulting in a significant DPS loss simply because one of her arrows missed an enemy. That sounds dumb. To combat this, it's best to keep her closer to enemies despite her quite impressive range. The last big con I wanted to mention is simply the fact that many of Yoimiya's teams require quite a bit of investment. If you pair her in vaporized teams, this is slightly less of an issue, but even then, and also in other teams, many of her best teammates, including Fischl, Beidou, Xingqiu, Yelan, Pennant, and Yunjin, require some level of investment to perform optimally with team DPS in mind. Especially for characters like Beidou and Fischl, whose primary goal is to act as an off-field carry for Yoimiya to drive for. And she does drive them both very well, but what good is driving if the off-field carry is critting for 57 electro damage and a dream? Anyways, I want to address some common misconceptions with Yoimiya, whether good or bad for her overall outlook, because despite how simple she is to play, some players still don't fully understand her place in Genshin Impact. To start, let's discuss her burst. A lot of players assume Yoimiya's burst is pointless or negligible because of its seemingly low damage output, the fact that she herself can't even trigger it, and the fact that one of her best artifact sets makes it virtually impossible to consistently use off cooldown. But this is not true. Yoimiya's burst still accounts for a notable portion of her total team damage, and the vast majority of her ideal teammates possess some form of high uptime off-field damage that can trigger Yoimiya's burst tags consistently. Not constantly. Well, yes, consistently. And even when running Shimenawas, which will cost Yoimiya the consistency of her burst uptime, it still has the potential to account for some of her damage, especially in longer fights. So no, her burst is not useless, and although it's definitely one of the weaker DPS bursts in perspective, it still accounts for enough damage to warrant investing in it. Another somewhat common misconception is that Yoimiya can be played without a shielder. And while I'm not at all saying you can't play her without a shielder, she is significantly more stressful to play if you don't give her a shield. This is because, as I said earlier, she really needs to be able to constantly land her 3rd and 5th normal attacks, and having a shielder will allow her to do this without the fear of being interrupted, costing her a significant damage loss. And while you can definitely get away with niche options such as Xingqiu's damage reduction and interruption resistance or Beidou's burst shield, neither of those are as reliable as a dedicated shielder, and there are quite a few reliable dedicated shielders in the game nowadays. Finally, with misconceptions is Yoimiya's ICD. ICD basically just refers to how often a character can trigger a reaction, and Yoimiya somehow got a bad rap because when compared to characters like Xiangling and Hu Tao, both of whom can vaporize a significant portion of their already high damage, Yoimiya can't do that. But that does not make her a bad candidate for vape teams by any means whatsoever. Yoimiya's normal attack string was practically designed to be able to vape the most important and hard-hitting attacks in the sequence, and when done correctly, she benefits quite heavily from vape. Maybe not to the exact same extent as someone like Hu Tao, who can vape every single charged attack, but still enough to significantly increase Yoimiya's personal damage and make vape teams her overall strongest personal damage team style. So then, taking into account everything we've discussed, where exactly does Yoimiya stand, and what is the value of pulling for her in 2.8? So, personally, I'd like to think that Yoimiya is better than people think she is. Not necessarily in the sense that she's stronger than someone like Hu Tao, because mathematically she just isn't, but she's not that far behind her, and she requires such a small amount of effort to play optimally that I'm inclined to say she's a very fair and well-designed character. Her damage output is very high, and given her simplicity, she's a flexible unit to build a team around, whether you want to run her as a boss shredder in vaporized teams or a makeshift horde shredder with overload teams. The possibilities are quite a bit larger with Yoimiya than they are for other DPS units in similar positions, especially given newer character releases such as Yelan, who acts as a reliable vape enabler and buffer, Thoma, who allows Yoimiya to run a number of powerful team variations, and Yunjin, who with Constellations literally becomes a better buffer for Yoimiya than the best attack buffer in the game. So in general, if you're looking for a strong DPS character to help you with difficult content, Yoimiya is someone who I'd say you can very safely consider adding to your character roster. She's not the very strongest, but she does her job respectably well, and she's a super simple character to play, so if you're on mobile or you just prefer playing characters that don't require much mechanical skill to maximize, Yoimiya is a completely valid character to pull for. Alternatively though, if you're inclined to put in the work and learn and master a character, you might be left a bit unsatisfied with Yoimiya, given that there isn't much to learn and master, nor is there much room to expand her damage ceiling in the first place, and you'll absolutely be left wanting more from her damage when comparing her to mechanically challenging characters such as Hu Tao, especially taking into account that Hu Tao's damage ceiling reaches far higher than Yoimiya's when you learn and master her own mechanical difficulty to its fullest extent. Still though, I do like to zone out and spam left click, so I take Yoimiya off the bench every now and then when I'm feeling lazy. I'm gonna discuss a lot more about the nuanced topics with Yoimiya's changes in my 2.8 Yoimiya guides, such as, for example, whether it's worth using Echoes of Offering on her, things like that. So if you want to hear more about that specific information, keep an eye out for the full guide video. But for now, if you enjoyed this video, or it helped you in any way, please leave a like and consider subscribing. It very much helps my channel. Also consider joining my Discord server so I can say hello to you and we can bond over how swag Sumeru looks, cause it looks swag. But yeah, I'm gonna go bond with myself about how swag Sumeru looks. Goodbye.